Giggy, it's me. So I've got some pictures here from March 2003. This is the Pong Soo. It was an illegal shipment on board this North Korean cargo ship that was worth over $100 million. It was headed to Melbourne, and interestingly, when they intercepted the vessel, they found out that it left NPO in North Korea on February 25, 2003, with a crew of 30, including a political secretary whose job it was to ensure that the crew remained loyal to the regime. They were told that if they defected, they would be shot immediately, so they had a firing squad with them on board. You know what else they had on board? A whole lot of illegal stuff, including luxury cars like Mercedes and BMWs, which were actually disassembled so they wouldn't arouse suspicion. But they also had cigarettes, mobile phones, jewelry, and other goodies. The ship itself is called the Pong Soo, and it was originally built in 1980 by a Japanese firm. It was meant to carry timber. It is 106 meters long, weighs 4,000 gross tons. The ship sailed to Singapore on February 27th, 3 days after it left North Korea, where it took on more fuel. It then traveled to Indonesia, where it picked up more cargo, and then set sail for the southern coast of Australia, where it intended to offload its cargo. And I just thought I'd share those details with you, because I think it's important that we learn about North Korea. We don't hear a lot about it, and of course, many people have said to me, why do you talk about it? It's a country that has nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, but it's very isolated. Well, I think that's precisely the reason why we should understand it better. Because as we saw during the Cold War, you can have countries that are thousands and thousands of kilometers away from each other, and yet they can still be engaged in proxy conflicts. And we see that today in Syria, for instance. I also believe that as Australians, we should be interested in the activities of this region right next door to us. And what's more, this cargo ship, the Pong Soo, was heading to Melbourne, to our city, to our shores. And in fact, there was a newspaper report in the Herald Sun at the time which said that Australian authorities had been watching the ship for weeks prior to its arrival, but it wasn't until it docked in Port Kembla on the southern coast of New South Wales that they boarded the ship and made the arrests. There were 2 men arrested, one of whom was the captain of the ship, and what happened to him was that he was sentenced to 6 months jail time. He was released after serving 4 months. The other man who was arrested was a 29-year-old Chinese national who acted as the shipping agent for the goods. He was sentenced to 9 months jail time, but was released after serving 4 months. Now, this isn't the first time we've talked about North Korea on this channel. Now, if you want to get a better understanding of North Korea, there's no better place to start than our earlier episode on the assassination of Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of the current supreme leader of North Korea. That's a great starting point, but in this episode, I want to talk about the media. Specifically how the big media organizations shape our understanding of events like the one I've just described to you involving this North Korean cargo ship. You see, I used to work in the mainstream media. In fact, I spent 13 years there, so I know how these news organizations operate. And I think it's important that we have a basic understanding of how they operate so we can better understand their output. So we can better understand the news we consume every day. In Australia, there are essentially 2 media organizations that dominate the national security space. There's the Nine Network, which includes the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and there's News Limited, which is owned by the Murdoch family and includes newspapers such as The Australian, The Daily Telegraph, and the Herald Sun. And these 2 organizations are so dominant that they make it difficult for anyone else to break through. That's why when I worked at the ABC, and I was trying to pitch stories to my bosses about North Korea, they didn't really want to run them. They said that it wasn't relevant to Australians. Well, as I've just shown you, it is relevant to Australians. And even if it weren't, it should be our decision to decide what is relevant and what isn't. But the problem is that these big media organizations exert an influence over us without us even realizing it. For instance, both Rupert Murdoch and the Nine Network have extensive government connections. Both organizations have received significant subsidies from the Australian government to support their journalism, particularly in the national security space. In fact, Rupert Murdoch himself is a member of the Prime Minister's National Security Committee, which advises the Australian government on national security matters. Now, I'm not saying that these guys are deliberately trying to control the narrative, or that they don't believe in the stories they publish, but what I am saying is that their close ties with the government mean that they have access to information and resources that others don't, and this gives them a significant advantage when it comes to shaping the national security debate. For instance, let's take the ABC. They're government funded, which means that they're ultimately accountable to politicians rather than to us, the viewers. And this is a problem because it means that they can be influenced by political pressure, which is exactly what happened in the case of the ping pong. You see, when I worked there was a concerted effort to avoid reporting on anything that could be seen as controversial or embarrassing to the government. And this is why the ABC did UNT report on this North Korean cargo ship arriving in Australia with illegal goods on board. It didn't fit the narrative that the government wanted to push. But there's another reason why the ABC didn't report on this story, and that's because they simply didn't have the resources. You see, the ABC is chronically underfunded, which means that they can't afford to send reporters to cover stories like this one. And this is a real shame because it means that we, the Australian public, are denied the opportunity to learn about these important issues. But it's not just the ABC that's guilty of this. Every single media organization in Australia is to blame. They all have a vested interest in keeping the government happy. And this is why they rarely publish anything that could be seen as controversial or embarrassing. If you want to break through all of this and get a better understanding of world events, then you need to look beyond the mainstream media. You need to find alternative sources of information. And this is where social media can be a real game changer. If you follow alternative news sources, you will get a much better understanding of what is really happening in the world. It's a win-win situation. You get to stay informed and you help hold the mainstream media to account. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your support and I hope you continue to tune in. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. It's free and it helps get the message out to more people. You can also support us directly through various platforms. Thanks again for watching and I'll see you next time.